Good evening and welcome to the League of Women Voters Presents. I'm Jim Robertson and our topic tonight is real problems with voting. My guests are on my far right, Elaine Blodgett. She's the state president of the Missouri League of Women Voters. Wendy Norn, Boone County Clerk, and Brianna Lennon is the Deputy Director of Elections and Elections Council with Secretary of State's Office. Thank you. And thanks for joining us tonight. Voting is, like Wendy says, there's a million studies. Everybody always looks at voting, and there's always, seems like some voting legislation rolling around ready. On the upcoming November ballot, we've got a 6-day early voting constitutional amendment. There was an attempt to place, I believe, a government photo ID on the ballot and fell short. And I want to talk a minute about the Department of Revenue photo ID. My friends who are proponents of such things, their argument is that, well, you need a photo ID to cash a check or to board an airplane or to do any number of things that we do in modern life. And how can we be sure that the voting system has integrity, and why not use a photo ID, a government ID for voters? Wendy, you want to
I think my
address
opinion on this is fairly well known, but the fact is yes, TSA puts on their website, you have to have a government-issued photo ID. Banks do that. Underlying their laws, if you don't have one, there are alternatives you can provide. I don't know if you've ever shown up at the airport and been behind somebody who does not have it. They'll pull them aside, they'll talk with them. If you call ahead of time, they'll give you a series of documents, very similar to the documents we ask for. A utility bill with your name on it, some other government ID with your name and address on it. Those types of documents that give some idea that you are who you say you are. The federal government, banks, everybody recognizes there are people in our society who do not have access to a driver's license every day that their life. What if your purse is stolen? What do you do particularly when you're traveling? Well, TSA isn't going to force you to stay in New York until your driver's license gets there. So while they say that, for those people who don't have ID, there are mechanisms available for it. So it's really not a true argument. So we do ask for identification of every voter who comes in to vote. They do have to provide something. We use our mailings to verify who they are and where they live. I know people just think I'm mailing out these sample ballots just for fun and games, but it is part of the verification process ongoing that we do to verify that our voters are who they say they are and they live where they say they are.
You actually get a card with that ballot.
Yeah, you get a card with that ballot that can be used as that. Mm-hmm. And it's a non-forwardable piece of mail. So, I mail them out, I'll get 15,000 back from the post office because they are not supposed to deliver unless you reside there.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the underlying question there has to do with the integrity of voting, integrity of elections. Is there voter fraud in Missouri? Brianna, you work for you're the deputy elections chief for the state of Missouri.
I mean, to talk about voter fraud, there has not been any credible kind of complaint of voter fraud that's been related to photo ID. There's been no impersonation fraud. One of the things to remember too is that when you register to vote for the first time, you either have to do it in person or you have to show a form of ID, and oftentimes it is a photo ID when you go to register to vote, or vote absentee for the first time if you haven't voted in person or shown an ID yet. So there are, as Wendy said, a number of safeguards in place to make sure that everything that an eligible voter needs to show is seen by an LEA, is verified, and once they go to the polls, showing the identification is one more step. And that's why right now it's so broad that you can have different kinds of ID.
You mentioned, oh, go ahead.
There is, the one kind of area that fraud that pops up is an absentee ballot area that has plagued various parts of the state at different times over the last 40 years. They tend to be situations where candidates will work the absentee ballot system, delivering applications to the election authority. Ballots are mailed out. Candidate shows up at the person's house saying, I'm the notary, I'm here to pick up your ballot. Those kinds of things are the most common, particularly nursing homes, preying on older people. Those have been the areas of voter fraud that you see. It has nothing to do.
Photo ID would not.
I know,
have
it has
an impact
nothing to
on that.
do, and what's interesting, the people who are advocates of imposing a photo ID would not impose it on people who absentee vote, which is probably the one area where it would be, might possibly benefit from somebody. So none of their proposals have advocated any kind of showing. It's only those who show up at the polling place, which is the least likely place for people to do it. And you mentioned at registration, the other thing that's been going on since 2006 with the state voter database, every record we get, voters' name, their driver's license, if they have one in Missouri, last 4 digits of their social security number, and date of birth are verified through the Department of Revenue or the Social Security Administration that this person in fact exists and that they're alive, and whether or not there's a felony record on them. And so that is a big major leap in protecting against what was the one of these things is, I remember Kit Bond claimed they were registering dogs and cats
That's
and
a
things.
common,
People turn them in.
Mickey Mouse.
That was, there's nothing, we've had people turn fraudulent things in. It doesn't mean they get through the system and they vote.
The system's working when that happens.
Right, right.
Elaine, you wrote a letter in April to the Tribune.
Refresh me.
Yeah, it was in opposition to the, I believe it was the voter ID bills that were in the legislature then. And you posited that there are lots of problems with voting, with non-voting, but impersonation was not among them.
Right, that's the problem. It's getting people to register is the big problem, at least from the League of Women Voters standpoint. And then the second problem is getting people to vote once they've registered. I think registration, it shouldn't be difficult, and I don't think it is difficult because groups like ours and others send people out to help people at church or various places register to vote. And at one time years ago, we used to go to the supermarkets and register people. But you have to get them for 5 minutes, and it's always like, no, I've got other things to do. So first you have to get them registered, and then getting them out to vote. And the other thing that I guess I always worry about is once you're registered to vote, you've kind of got this little duty on you, and that means that you need to go vote, but you need to understand what's on the ballot. And that's the other service that the League tries to provide, as well as the state went to plain language, which I think was very important, so that the voter would know exactly what the ballot meant.
One of the things, and she's very right, first of all, the biggest problem is you got to get people registered. And I'm an advocate we should have universal registration, that it shouldn't, and there are other countries that take multiple databases to build the eligible voter list. Canada is one of those. I mean, they spend money on it, they put it all together. I mean, they put together their, they'll call a parliamentary election, they'll put together the voter roll and have an election all in about 12 weeks, and we spend gabillions trying to do all of these
So a
things.
birth record would in effect be the beginning of
Right,
the voter record.
right. Your birth record, utility bills, all of these things. And there are lots of studies. I think the Pew Center for the States is being a big advocate of, we can do a better job of this. And we don't have to be pushing all this paper around, and keeping people on the files who shouldn't be on the files. It would be much better, a bigger avenue of fraud is if I've got people on my files who are no longer eligible. So that's the reason of trying to get people on. So clean voter rolls, getting people on are really important. We've made some big leaps in Missouri in the last year and a half. Young people and even older people, I don't do anything except online. How much of our lives have moved online? Young people do nothing in the world. A piece of paper and a pencil is so foreign to them. And both in Boone County and now at the state level, we do have an online registration system for voters, and that's going to help make it easier for people, and less likely that their registration's going to get lost in the shuffle and things like that. So gradually some of these barriers are being broken down, but there's a much more economical and easier way to build an eligible voter file than the way we do it.
I know that we don't really know how many registered voters there are statewide, but we know that somebody mentioned 3 million registered voters didn't bother to vote in last November's election.
Yeah, statewide we have about 4 million on the rolls, but statewide we don't see anywhere near that come out for turnout.
What does the state do to try to, or better question is, should the state try to encourage voter turnout?
Well, since I've been in Secretary Kander's office, the primary goals that he's been imparting on the elections staff and really in the whole office has been to make sure that not only eligible voters are voting, but that all eligible voters should be voting. And so we have been working on making sure that some areas of voters that have not historically had high turnout have had higher turnout. We have a military portal that allows military members and overseas voters to register to vote, request their absentee ballot, and receive their absentee ballot. It's been used in the primary, it's going to be used in the general. It's had a fantastic turnout so far, and we expect that to go up. We've been, like we always have, sending out our own information to voters to make sure that voters are aware that elections are coming up. We do outreach, we do public service advertisements and things like that, because it is very important to make sure that all of the eligible voters are getting a chance to know what's on the ballot and also when they should be voting and when the registration deadlines are. That's also one that we've seen, making sure people know that there actually is a deadline and that it's 4 weeks before the election, because many people don't know that.
The League of Women Voters spends a lot of energy and time
Yes, we
trying to
do.
educate voters on that.
I think also that to a degree, I don't know it's so much now as it was in the past, but it's kind of a family tradition. If your parents voted and thought it was important, the children are probably going to vote also, probably pushed by their parents to do this as their civic duty. So I think that's another thing. Getting new voters who haven't ever been in that kind of an atmosphere is a little bit more difficult because
Yeah, and
Yes.
I think the first, and I take this as being the election official in a college town very seriously, because I truly believe a person's first interaction with voting may set a pattern for the rest of their life. If they have a bad interaction the first time they vote, they may not come back to a polling place for 40 years. And so I think that is very critical, and that's why I try and stay on top of what technology, what young people need, those types of things. I am still the only person in the country who emails sample ballots to people. There were other states that were mailing sample ballots to voters long before I had a budget to do it, to let them know when there was an election, what to do. Very soon after that, people started asking me, "Can't you email this to me?" And so I developed a system for that. But again, we need a big movement in my profession of trying to address this whole electronic revolution, because we are still living on a piece of paper and marking it. And, Brianna talks about for military and overseas, that's where we've been able to get the laws changed. I mean, nobody likes voting against the military who's over in Iraq. So you can get the laws changed for them.
Why wouldn't that system work for everybody? The kind of
There are security issues that people have on these things. And that is why a lot of advances in voting historically have started with military and military personnel. I mean, the first absentee voting was for military personnel. Abraham Lincoln. Union soldiers couldn't get home to vote for him. They set up a system. They abandoned it, but they brought it back during World War I and World War II. It became kind of a permanent thing. So those become the incubator to kind of work out what you need to do with it. So I'm hoping these state systems that are being set up that will allow this type of thing can work out those things. We're never going to, I think we've destroyed faith in an online voting system when they went after the electronic equipment and totally destroyed faith in that. And one political party,
was that
I have to say it's
misguided?
my political party just convinced everybody there was no way you could safely do that. That I think the dominant concept would be some type of kiosk system or some type of delivery of the ballot. They then would have places where they could then deliver the paper ballot back, or some form of kiosk voting is kind of where they're doing it. Where that's going is going to come out of probably LA counties. They're too big to use any of the voting systems, and they're really doing some work on this, on how we can work this out.
Well, you mentioned earlier that 85% turnout in 2008.
And we went down.
Right. So people, when they have a reason to turn out, they'll turn out to vote.
That was definitely a watershed election, particularly with young people on that. So they felt like, well, we were in an economic crisis, if you remember. We went into meltdown. We had charismatic candidate on one side. We had some people who believed strongly on another side. We were very much a swing state, one of the 5 states, and billions were spent by the political parties getting out the vote. Now that's where when you say, what's the state doing to get out the vote? What am I doing to get out the vote? We have no budgets to get out the vote. The parties spend billions getting out their voters. And one of the problems with that is, I mean, we have allowed that whole process to be turned over to the parties. They get out their voters. They know who their voters are. They've identified, they have very sophisticated, I mean, I look at the stuff they have and talk to the people. If we could only have what they have, I mean, they know, minute by minute, they knew which of their people were coming out, which weren't. That we have no systems who can do that in government. But that's what $20 billion buys you. And that's more than we've spent on election administration in the entire history of this country, was spent on one election by the political party. So that's the difference.
Citizens United would actually help us get out voters.
Well, they'll get their voters out. But see, that's where the turnout comes from, when there are these big dollar campaigns focusing on getting their voters out. That's the other piece of that pie. They're spending a lot of, you notice it, I bet your ad revenue kind of went down, in some of these elections from when they had these big dollar
Well, they spend it on
campaigns.
TV instead of
Well,
newspapers. for the
yeah,
most
the
part, but-
presidential ones do, but even other ones, you'll notice
Yeah.
when there are fewer local races going on, probably your ad revenue goes down at the paper.
Absolutely.
I was at the off-campus dorms working the 2008 elections, and I will have to say it was so much fun because, of course, you're off-campus and it's mostly all young people. And they were so excited. They were there at 5:30. We were there at 4, weren't we? 4 to 8:30 in the evening was our job description. But it was just so exciting to see them come vote. And I mean, some of them would get emotional as they came up to sign in and vote. So you realized that, and hoped, that this would carry forward with them. That's what I think was the most important thing. Of course, we had a lot of college students helping in that election.
It was a
And all that.
major.
So it was just really
It was
fun
very-
and
Yeah, how do
interesting,
you
and so
bottle
many
that?
young people.
Well, and that's, the only thing I worried about that, I mean, it was the most enthusiastic I'd seen young people
Yes.
ever.
Right.
And, you hope that, you saw them become less, they didn't turn out in 2010. They turned out in 2012 for a presidential, not in near the numbers they turned out in 2008. You hope that that enthusiasm they had, and because it was so high, sometimes you worry about them becoming so discouraged that they believe they never want to be let down again or something like that. I hope not.
Well, but
we
the
had
John F. Kennedy election,
well, look
way
what happened to
back
my
when, that was
generation.
real exciting
Yeah, that
for
was
a
real
lot of
exciting.
young people
we
then
had
to
a lot
do
of
that.
us, and then we disappeared in the 70s and 80s and did disco, and you got to remember that was that generation.
But I mean, every once in a while, you
They
get those
got-
breakthroughs.
You
right?
do, and that group of people also came back in 2008. That whole
Yes.
crowd was showing up too, of things like that. So there are certain transformational, they call them, elections. Can you do anything administratively? Well, definitely, the more you register, you got to get them registered, and that's number one. That is the number one thing I think everybody recognizes, because a lot of people don't get interested in election till 10 days before, and a lot of times that's too late if they haven't been registered. So this concept of doing that.
Registration ends how many days before?
It's the fourth Wednesday, about 27 days before, so they need to be registered before then.
It's coming up.
Well, you all know this. In St. Louis, I ran for 2 years the information office at the League of Women Voters. Well, and 2 weeks before an election, you would not believe the questions that you get. What
Yeah,
is
I
on
would.
the ballot? So you go through, and then they would say to me, "You sound like a nice lady. Could you tell me how to vote?" And I said, "No, I can't tell you how to vote. You must make that decision yourself." And various things like that. I mean, you get all kinds of questions. Where's my polling place? Which even back 20 years ago, you had books. And you'd go through St. Louis County books or St. Louis City books looking for their address line and all that sort of stuff. But you get all kinds of wild questions. And then in the 2008, I had some poor young man come up and hand me his ballot. And I looked at it, and here we are in Boone County. It was for St. Louis County.
Yeah.
It's like, oh boy,
Yeah.
not gonna fly.
No end to.
Yeah, we get a lot.
Yeah,
I
you
even
just
had
get
a
a lot of
state rep
things.
from St. Charles call me and ask me if I could give his son a St. Charles County ballot. I was like, and I keep every state's
don't you
ballot
keep
sitting
them
around
all?
in my back
Right.
room. So I don't blame young people. This was a
Right.
state representative. I should have known better that I don't have every ballot in the whole country sitting around in my back room. Now, one of the things, we talk about, there's an early voting proposition on the ballot. The question is, does early voting increase turnout? Does making it easier make turnout stronger? And there are so many studies that are conflicting on that. And in fact, some study, and you can Missouri's a good comparison on this. In 2008, we had no early voting. We had the most restrictive much more restrictive absentee ballot laws than most other states. We require a notary still, which is way in the dark ages for people who get sent a ballot. At that time, Ohio had, and both Ohio and Florida and many other states, 35 other states had early voting. But the state that had the biggest increase in turnout in 2008, of all the states, we were one of the 4 that did it. We had a bigger increase in turnout than Ohio, than Florida, all of these states. And so that's the kind of things that academics are looking at and saying, is it really doing it? And there's some theory that if you make it too long, if you make that early voting period too long, there's a good study out of Wisconsin, you actually start depressing turnout in an early voting period because it goes so far, it becomes, I can vote any day, I can do this, stuff like that. So everybody's kind of
People have
searching
to
what is that
move.
ideal period that's going to help it. Now, I'm in favor of early voting. I would like, before I fall off the face of the earth, to administer an election with early voting, just because I believe it's one of those pieces of our society that people have become accustomed to banking at any time,
Sure.
shopping at any time, all of these things. I have not favored any of these early proposals.
So you don't favor the proposal that will
Absolutely
be on the
not.
November
I
ballot?
do not. Both this and the petition, we're micromanaging the administration of the elections in the Constitution. For example, it has what hours my office can be open and offer this in the Constitution of Missouri. I think that is absurd because then if we need to make changes, if we need to tweak this, as studies come out and say, there are a lot of studies going on that a lot of people are learning from as other states have been through this 15, 20 years, we're freezing in our Constitution some pretty absurd language on the administrative procedures for a local government office that I am just totally opposed to. Both the more progressive one and this kind of regressive one that's on the
we're going to have
ballot.
to end it on that.
Shoot, I had a question.
Sorry, hold
Yeah,
that question,
no
Elaine.
questions.
Thank you all very much for being with us. And I guess if we got a message for viewers, it's don't forget to register and then vote.
That's right.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being with us this evening. Until next time, good night.